Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So JP Morgan, the biggest US bank, is advising its private clients to diversify away from the dollar. There's an interesting article here on Zero Hedge entitled JP Morgan, we believe the dollar could lose its status as world's reserve currency. And as you know, I've been talking about this for the last few years. I remember, I think it was last year, Jamie Dimon was in China and he said, oh, the dollar is going to be the reserve currency almost forever. That's what he said, that the yuan was not, didn't have a chance in the foreseeable future. But now we see that they're actually advising their clients to diversify away from the dollar. So I'll go through the article that just came out on Zero Hedge. So this is what Zero Hedge says, and I quote, almost 8 years ago, we first presented a chart first created by JP Morgan's Michael Sembalest, which showed very simply and vividly that reserve currencies don't last forever and that in the not too distant future, the US dollar would also lose its status as the world's most important currency, since it is never different this time. And Zero Hedge goes on to say, as Sembalest put it back in January 2012, and this is a quote from Sembalest, I am reminded of the following remark from late MIT economist Rudiger Dornbusch. Crises take a much longer time coming than you think, and then it happens much faster than you have thought. Perhaps it is not a coincidence, then, that in light of the growing number of mentions of MMT and various other terminal destructive monetary policies that have been proposed to kick on the current financial system the can just a little bit longer, that the topic of longevity of reserve currency status is once again becoming all the rage, and none other than JP Morgan's private bank asked in this month's investment strategy note whether the dollar's exorbitant privilege is coming to an end. Zero Hedge continues, so why is JP Morgan, after first creating the iconic chart above, which has since spread virally across all financial corners of the internet, not only worried that the dollar's reserve status may be coming to an end, but in fact goes so far as to state that, and I quote, we believe the dollar could lose its status as the world's dominant currency due to structural reasons as well as cyclical impediments. So this is what they say here. Now this is the research they issued to their private clients, high net worth individuals, of course, JP Morgan private clients. So it's entitled, Is the Dollar's Exorbitant Privilege Coming to an End? In brief, and this is from JP Morgan Private Bank, the US dollar has been the world's dominant reserve currency for almost a century. As such, many investors today, even outside the United States, have built and become comfortable with sizable US dollar overweights in their portfolios. However, we believe the dollar could lose its status as the world's dominant currency, which could see it depreciate over the medium term due to structural reasons as well as cyclical impediments. I mean, this morning I was talking in my video about the Uncle Sam spending like a drunken sailor, right? I think this is what they're talking about here as well. They go on to say, JP Morgan, as such, diversifying dollar exposure by placing a higher weighting on other currencies in developed markets and in Asia, as well as precious metals, makes sense today. Note how they say precious metals. They don't just say gold. So I'm inclined to believe that they mean gold and silver, maybe some other precious metals, but mostly gold and silver, I would say. This diversification can be achieved with a strategy that maintains the underlying assets in an investment portfolio, but changes the mix of currencies within that portfolio. This is a completely bespoke approach that can be customized to meet the unique needs of individual clients. So I'll continue with their research. The rise of the US dollar. It is commonly perceived that the US dollar overtook the Great British Pound as the world's international reserve currency with the signing of the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II. The reality is that sterling's value was eroded for many decades prior to Bretton Woods. The dollar's rise to international prominence was fueled by the establishment of the Federal Reserve System a little over a century ago and U.S. economic emergence after World War I. The Federal Reserve System aided in the establishment of more mature capital markets and a nationally coordinated monetary policy, two important pillars of reserve currency countries. I have to stop there and actually disagree with JP Morgan Private Bank. I think that if the Federal Reserve System hadn't been established in 1913, that the dollar would still be a very strong currency, but that's a different story here. Being the world's unit of account has given the United States what former French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called an exorbitant privilege. So it was Giscard d'Estaing, not Charles de Gaulle. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing also became prime minister eventually by being able to purchase imports and issue debt in its own currency and run persistent deficits, seemingly without consequence. Well, that's where I think this is coming to, that other countries around the world, they can see that it's not possible for them to keep accepting debt that's backed by nothing, is not a promissory note. The other thing that I think is driving this is the fact that the US is using the dollar as a weapon to put sanctions on other countries that don't do that don't toe the line with U.S. objectives, political or geopolitical objectives. The shifting center, I continue, this is JP Morgan. There is nothing to suggest that the dollar dominance should remain in perpetuity. Agreed. In fact, the dominant international currency has changed many times throughout history, going back thousands of years as the world's economic center has shifted. After the end of World War II, the US accounted for biggest share of world GDP at more than 25%. This number is brought to more than 40% when we include Western European powers. Since then, the main driver of economic growth has shifted eastward towards Asia at the expense of the US and the West. China is at the epicenter of this recent economic shift, driven by the country's strong growth and commitment to domestic reforms. Over the last 70 years, China has quadrupled its share of global GDP to around 20%, roughly the same share as the US. And this share is expected to continue to grow in the years ahead. China is no longer just a manufacturer of low-cost goods, as a growing share of corporate earnings is coming from high-value add sectors like technology. China is regaining its status as a global superpower. So it goes on to talk about China. It goes on to talk about the US dollar's share of central bank reserves, as you can see here in this chart. So what's their conclusion? Let's see here. Given the persistent rising deficits in the United States in both fiscal and trade, we believe the US dollar could become vulnerable to a loss of value relative to a more diversified basket of currencies, including gold. As we scan client portfolios, we see that many of them have far more US dollar exposure than we feel is prudent. At this stage of the economic cycle, we believe this exposure should be more diversified. In many cases, our recommendation would likely be to place a higher weighting on other G10 currencies in Asia, and gold. See chart. The interesting thing about JP Morgan's FX exposure bar chart, if you look at the current international JP Morgan client allocation, there's no allocation for XAU, which is gold. But you look at the our recommended currency exposure now, you can see the US dollar there is shrunk a lot. It's the darkish blue bar. And then at the top of the new bar on the right hand side, you can see there that it's gold. It's like the purple. And prior to the current recommendation, there was no gold recommended. That looks very interesting to me as well. So this is just not Maneco 64 here, the home of alternative economics and contrarian views. It looks like even JP Morgan, the biggest bank in the US, is now advising its clients to diversify away from the US dollar. I personally prefer gold, but of course diversification is up to the individual, what the individual wants to have. So very interesting. This is just going to continue. What does it mean to people who don't have an account with JP Morgan Private Bank, to the general public? You know, how does this affect you? You might be asking, you know, what's the point of you coming out with this video? Well, the point is that not only the United States government and the United States as a whole will lose the exorbitant privilege, that will translate to higher prices for the general public. It won't be as easy for the US public to buy things as cheaply as they have for the last 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, I've been living here in the UK for 25, 26 years, and the rule of thumb has always been, when you go to the United States, and I've been to the United States quite a few times since I've come here, is that even though the pound has been worth about 150 over the last 25 years on average, maybe a little less or a little more, when you go to the United States, for example, something that costs 15 pounds here will not cost like $20, $25. It will cost $15. So things are a lot cheaper in the US. And I think this is what this will mean going forward for the public in the United States. It will be, the dollar will lose its value against tangible things, against services. Everything is going to be more expensive. There's going to be less demand for the dollar. That's what it means. And JP Morgan agrees. And as the JP Morgan once said, gold is money, everything else is credit. The US dollar as we know it today is credit. It's just a Federal Reserve note, right? The real dollar is gold, a weight of gold, a weight of silver. And it looks like JP Morgan Bank hasn't forgotten that. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you also share it far and wide. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.